All right, I think my mic is live.
Okay, there we go. And Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Andrew.
Okay. Andrew Carr is joining us from Flint Hill School in Northern Virginia. At Flint Hill, he teaches a Maker elective for 7th and 8th grade students. He's also an avid board game person. I met him, I had the privilege of meeting him this past weekend at EduCon. So Andrew's going to share a little bit what he does with us, what he does with his makerspace at his school. Go ahead, Andrew, it's all yours.
Fantastic. So actually, if you watched Tim earlier this evening, one of the neat things about MakerCulture is that the actual tools and tech and stuff scales pretty well. So while we don't currently have 3D printers, we have some high school kids who are working on joining a local build group. We have Raspberry Pis, we have Arduinos. Once you start using tools, you can figure out how to use most of the tools at the levels the kids are comfortable with. So the thing that's been most interesting to me, especially as MakerCulture has really spiked in popularity over the last year, 18 months, is that I've been trying to really think about what makes MakerCulture and our Maker group different than a shop class. I have a couple of blog posts. Oh, I'm Andrew. I blog at tyenjeans.com, and I'm tyenjeans on Twitter. It's not fashion advice, but it's a unique identifier. So I've been thinking about what I don't really like about shop class from my experience, which is mainly filled with a lot of regret because I went to school at the last gasp of shop classes, and by the time I started teaching, like those whole wings were locked in the buildings I taught in. What we're looking at instead is if you separate it from the tools, what are we talking about? And I think that the distinction between the things you're making, the products, and the culture that surrounds it is pretty important, as is the distinction between what we're talking about accomplishing for the school. I will certainly try to speak more slowly. Listening to Tim on the way up, I should have realized what bandwidth helium voice can do to my speed of conversation. So I'm going to talk a lot about a couple of organizations outside of my school. Hopefully I'm at a better pace, Beth. One is Nova Labs. It's my local hackerspace in Reston, Virginia. They're novalabs.org and Nova_labs on Twitter. So aside from the fact that my bullet points got a bit munged going through the Blackboard conversion, here's my 5 principles for thinking about MakerCulture and makerspaces at any level. We were talking about this at EduCon last weekend in a session by Pam Moran and Ira Sokol about re-envisioning the library and trying to think about what your definitions of a library would be if you were designing it from a zero base. Like no remaking what's there, but why would you have a library in 2013? And one of the things that came up was like a garden of rabbit holes. So what are you going to do to cultivate that? And so my rules are tools at the bottom, stairs from the top, ample signage, drop in anytime, and no one has to go in alone. So the rest of this talk is going to be kind of expanding and showing what that looks like both in our K12 space and in other spaces I have access to in MakerCulture, who's my corner of MakerCulture at large. So starting with tools at the bottom, this is really talking about the fact that there are people who will jump in, and if you've got a big deep hole, they're going to find themselves straight to the bottom in the corner they want to be in, and they're just going to start digging. This is a photo from a drone group that started, I think, last week at Nova Labs. There was an email out that said, hey, who wants to get together and build drones? The kit we're going to buy is $800, and 20 people decided to buy the kit and show up within a week to build autonomously controlled, hovering, flying robots. Because that's the kind of deep-end nerds that they are. Like, somebody says, do you want to do X? And they've got this kind of pent-up energy of, yeah, I want to do X. And so suddenly there's 20 new drones flying around Virginia. That's a particular type of like autodidactic nerd. Sometimes I think the Fab Lab that James has is really well suited for this. it's not that these tools are only used by incredibly self-motivated, autonomous, autodidactic learners, but if you want to use them, they're there. Having the tools, the kind of like Fab Lab suite of tools, gives you an incredible amount of power and flexibility for whatever you're like super passionate about. If you can't make it with a ShopBot, a laser cutter, and a 3D printer, then it's probably a car. Yeah, it probably has to involve an internal combustion engine to not fit into those three tools. This is a guy named Mike I met from Atmel. Atmel is the chip manufacturer that makes all of the microcontrollers that primarily power Arduinos and other little hobbyist electronics boards. And he has down here his little hacked hexbug spiders, and I was so fascinated by them. He sat down and like spent 20 minutes drawing out incredibly complicated circuits for me about how the little hacked hexbugs worked, and I had no idea what he was saying. But I was super into it, so I went and bought a hexbug, and I ripped it apart, and I found a controller that would meet me at my skill level, and I totally just like dove in and hacked at it until I had something that functioned for that itch I needed to scratch. These are our kids. We had some interest in pinball. We reached out to our local pinball league. You probably have a local pinball league too that you might not know about. And now they're working on doing the repair of this old electromechanical pinball machine, which is, I think, 3 times older than them combined. So these are for the tools at the bottom are how we support those who are just going to dive in. So having some tools ready, being able to give them some training on that tools, and be able to have enough craft around them to help them refine technique. For a teacher's perspective, your real goal there is not to they're already going to strain and run as far as they want to run. Your job is to be able to, if they get stuck, either stuck because they're in a rut and they've already mastered everything, being able to give them a +1 project, like what's the next step up, or if they're just slamming their head in something, maybe you can scale it down. Maybe you can find the project that's half a step below or a full step below where they are, so they can build a little bit of new knowledge and still move on. Also, Makerspaces and MakerCulture gives them both a cohort of people who are doing maybe not the same thing in the same technical skill set, but also in that sort of creative process. And it also gives them an audience, because if somebody's in their own little pit digging down, is deep into the subject they care about, sooner or later they're going to come out with a flying robot. Yay, Melanie's here. And everybody loves a flying robot. So that's the tools at the bottom. We're supporting the people who are really super excited about something and are just looking for a place to receive support for that enthusiasm. The stairs at the top is the other end of the spectrum. Sorry that I got mine. So this is Francesca Zamaro's lab. She calls it, and I'm really sad that got mudged, she has the greatest name ever. She calls it the Collaboratory, which you can say that a couple of times to yourself and realize that it is just as sweet as it sounds like. And so this is a K-4 makerspace that they built at she teaches at the United Nations International School in Manhattan. So I'm in love with a lot of the way this works in terms of storage, and because she's a K-4 space, they really have to think about tools and access. So they've got the height-based complexity level. If you look into the bins, you can see it's basic Legos at the bottom, gears and bushings and other kind of things that are going to move stuff here, and all the motors and Lego WeDos and NXT bricks they're not out of reach, but high enough that the kids know that they have to ask an adult before they go and take them down. So the idea of physically scaffolding space and tool access. Yeah. Oh, you met it? Awesome. I'm glad that you've met Francesca. Yeah, I met Francesca this summer at Constructing Modern Knowledge, which I might as well pitch right now. Constructing Modern Knowledge is phenomenal. It was the best PD I've been to in 15 years of teaching. It's a week in lovely Manchester, New Hampshire. It's the 9th to the 13th of July this year. I'm an 11-month employee. I get 4 weeks off in the summer. I spent a week of it at CMK this year, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. That's how good it was. This is from our 5th grade. Oh, well, no, you can't hear me cheering for her. This is a 5th grade information class. They're practicing for Swedish movie trailers, which, if you haven't looked those up, are a lot of fun. This is a really low level, like they're getting their toe wet in the process of making films, and this is where Tim and I talked about shooting video, making film, recording stuff, capturing images and sound. I think also that kid's got a fantastic Hasselhoff, so I'm not sure if there's space for Hasselhoff karaoke, but he's got it. This is from our makers group. This was our challenge for this week. They had to get a message from one end of the hallway to the other. It was one of 25 Pinky and the Brainisms that I printed up for them. And they had to design their own signaling and communications means from one end of the hallway to the other. And so this pair had designed this color-coded series of flags that they flashed light signals through those holes. And it was starting from the ground up, how do you pass a signal from place to place? Zero prerequisite knowledge, but a very clear, accessible, direct challenge that could scale for Tim's incoming freshmen or 3rd graders. This was a cardboard automata project. I'm sorry, the giraffe at the top got cut off. The prompt was, in one sentence, make a carousel, here's cardboard. We showed a 6-second video of another cardboard automata, and then they went open. So these are the big, broad steps at the top. Oh, this is Annika. This is my daughter. This is actually at the Mini Maker Fair in Norfolk. She was so excited by all of the different people who had booths and stuff and makers, and they had stuff they wanted to share, that she found a spare table and took out all the art supplies that we brought to occupy the 5-year-old and decided that she was a maker with her own table. And so she would just draw whatever picture she felt like drawing and then walk it over to somebody else at the fair, because that's what you do at a maker fair, is you make new things and you share them with others. It's 5-year-old drawing. Like, I know it's a stretch to call it maker culture, but for me, the fundamental act of maker culture is not tied to the particular product. Crayon drawings and 3D printed ABS and a good batch of cookies and a poem are all forms of participatory maker culture. And what really sets it apart from how we do it in our traditional academic experience is, what sets it apart as maker culture is the way that the community experience sets it apart from the traditional academic. Certainly nobody was going to give her a grade on the quality of her fairy pictures. Which is probably fortunate, because they're not great. But this is a Nova Labs Take Apart event. These are links, which I don't think you can click on, but the full slides are also up on tieandjeans.com. This is, Nova Labs has a now recurring event for basically any youth organization we can connect to. This was a Girl Scout troops. We had a whole bunch of old stuff. Like, there is an infinite supply of old printers out there. We had screwdrivers and other tools, and it was 4 hours where they could take it apart. There was only 2 incidents of blood, but that's pretty much, I think, par for the course when you're taking apart laser printers. And then it was fantastic. Zero prerequisite knowledge, no scaffolding of like let's force you to understand the circuit that you're looking at now, because that's not the idea. It's the big broad step that takes somebody who is at all interested and gives them something to do and a process to feel involved with it. This is the 3rd graders in our we have STEM clusters from K-4, so they're using a Makey, and this is my personal pet hashtag if anyone wants to take up the mantle with me. It's called Guerrilla Co-op. It's where you take a single-player video game, preferably from the 80s, and you turn it into a full-body kinesthetic multiplayer experience. So DDR Pac-Man, High Five Pac-Man are popular choices. I had one group try to work with Contra, which is really hard because it involves diagonals, and that's a mess. But it's a fun, crazy, yell, screaming mess. I have a great video of some teachers doing this from EduCon that I can't put up because it's full of profanity. 30 seconds into Pac-Man, they're just dropping it all over the place because they're excited. So the idea of broad steps is, how do you support those who drive by? How do you support the people who just like see something going on and pop in and want, in that, maybe this is me as a middle school teacher, they stop by the door and they want to know in that moment, like, hey, what's up? is this a place I'm allowed to be? And to extend that invitation, you need low threshold, bite-sized activities that welcome the broadest possible skill set and still celebrate whatever it is as making. You're building stuff sometimes, like it's nice for them to be able to have something that they take away, but the stuff is completely incidental to the maker identity and the cultural identification. And for me as a K12 teacher, the sense of real empowerment, which is lacking in so many places. Like, I did this on my own terms, and I can do it again just by deciding to show up. I have a blog post that was prompted by Melanie called What's Ideal for Middle School Makers, also at Tie and Jeans. Ample signage, and that's kind of a joke. For me, it comes back down to making the stuff you do here visible. This is stuff from James Deck's work at Marymount. Those are vinyl cut self-portraits they did in Think Photoshop and then ran to the vinyl cutter. Those are 3D printed student-created objects. This is the front of the MakerBot store in Lower Manhattan. It's a giant marble coaster all printed with their replicator printers. It's the only thing in the window of their tiny storefront because it's fascinating and people will stop and look in. When we're talking about signage, we're talking about how are you going to make people who are not already predisposed to think of themselves as maker aware that you even exist. We had a TEDx event at our school, and I went out to Nova Labs and used it to cut the big signage out of acrylic because TEDx has very precise rules about what fonts you can use, namely only Helvetica, and there was no way I was going to be able to cut a Helvetica @ by hand. But just bringing back these big plastic letters, which were not, as far as hard maker culture, I typed in Helvetica into Illustrator and I spit it out to the laser cutter. And then I had letters. It was not like a big challenging thing, but it increased the visibility of both Nova Labs and our maker program in general, because where did this sign come from? It is a breadcrumb that has really obvious questions built into it. These are some of my kids. This is the pinball machine. We moved it in the back of a athletics van all the way down to the Maker Fair in Norfolk, and there were people all day coming by, not because it worked, not because they could still come by and play pinball, because they were fascinated with what these 12 and 13-year-olds were doing neck deep in ancient electronics. It's big and visible. The idea that they could take their work in public and people would be interested in it. They weren't just like checking to see like, well, did you get it right? They wanted to see the process, they wanted to support the process and kind of just celebrate them for being on the path. And we took 2 days when we came back from winter break to do a 2-day Rube Goldberg activity where the kids had to try to pop balloons. You can see one about to be pulleyed up to the ceiling where there's a hideous death trap of push pins. 2 days of kids just building and making in whatever strange configurations they wanted and then walking around and seeing the work other people did. That process has generated so much more interest in the fact that you can have hard fun, which is another Stegerism. Hard fun doing all sorts of crazy stuff that doesn't look like school but leaves you mentally exhausted at the end of the day. That transition has been fantastic and has been a huge bit of signage, increasing our visibility as a program. I have to chase back Pacific Cookie Company is a Santa Cruz institution. Insomnia Cookies we found in Philly last week. They are both street cookie vendors that understand the power of where you put the giant box fan. If you put the box fan blowing out the right direction on the street, everybody will just kind of automatically troll in because you're pumping out cookie smell. A makerspace needs to pump out cookie smell as much as possible. If they have a kitchen to actually make cookies, then that's even better. If anyone knows how to like get facilities to let me have a kitchen in a classroom, I would love to hear about it. So no matter what you're doing, don't think you have to start with a 3D printer. Don't think you have to start with a laser cutter. Don't think you need to get Raspberry Pis because everyone has to program in Python. Start small. Everything starts small, but leave footprints so people can find you. The more footprints, the more visibility you have, the more you're going to get not only people who are interested in the broad step programs, which are not complicated. They're basically, 6th grade science without the training wheels taken off. And you're going to get a couple of deep divers. And then you have a makers program. I have an obligatory blog post about this called Fiefdoms and Revolutions, because if you don't advertise, if you're not visible, then you just become that kooky teacher who does that crazy thing and, oh, I could never do that. And that's not MakerCulture, that's shop class. So to drop in any time, I think this is the fundamental challenge that school offers. This is, again, from Eunice. This is the lower school art room next door. And is that like just the coziest art room you've ever seen? Like there's pillows, that's, I think, the Hudson, there's yachts in the background. It's a fantastic place. I just want to come and sit there on those little chairs and draw all day. And this is our current makerspace. It's really cozy and comfortable for the kids who happen to be in it. And in some ways, it's fascinating. It's fascinating for anyone who happens to be coming by, but it's not inviting. There's not a place for someone to come in and like really get into a new project. Like it looks like an exclusive club. It looks an awful lot like high school journalism looked for me in the mid-90s, which was certainly the first like school home I ever felt. Like it was the place I could go before school without even a teacher there and feel like I belonged there, which I think is fundamental for any sort of positive adolescent experience at school. But to be functional, we need to be in a space twice this size, or at least with twice as much free space and more open area near the front that says to people who are coming by, like, yeah, there's people working on stuff, but there's still room for you. I have this entire run of Disneyland's Haunted Mansion going through my head, so I will try not to say all that aloud. But the Haunted Mansion soundtrack has a lot to say about being inviting and still creepy. But yeah, Fascination doesn't schedule in advance. This is where I had a screenshot of our middle school schedule, which is all those colored boxes and stuff like that, but it didn't take. So just imagine it looks like yours, and there's not really a lot of time where 7th graders wander around going, gee, I wonder what I'll do with this 2-hour block that I have completely unstructured. I wonder how I'll best use my creative energies. Suddenly, if you have a school that's like that, again, please, I'm at Time Jeans, let me know. And the last bit is that no one has to go in alone. Like, people can. There's always deep divers who are, like, so far along on something that they're just ready to charge on, and if you can provide them some help, they're excited, but they're autodidacts, and they'll get where they want to go anyway. But the purpose of MakerCulture should be to say that, really convey that anybody, as you want to explore, you're going to have people who are willing to explore with you. You can choose your own path, but you'd never have to be isolated. You never have to feel that you're the only person who would think this is at all interesting. A, we have the internet to tell us that's not true. Everything is fascinating. But our job as a community is to make that tangible and concrete, even to 10 and 14 and 16-year-olds who lose sight of their cohort very quickly. Yes, I'd love to actually talk to people now, but Bill, you're right. I'm completely blessed by the fact that I actually have a room that has shelves this year. Last year I ran my makerspace out of a room that was like, I think dance and Chinese sometimes, and very much like I would wheel the cart in and we would do stuff and we'd lose 15 minutes at the end of it packing up. I have a kind of a time-lapse video of what that looks like, both on Tie and Jeans and on the Maker Ed blog. And it's fun, and it was nice to have more space, but I certainly love being able to leave things in place for a while. And this is kind of where I get to the whole issue of what MakerCulture is and how it proceeds in K12. I don't want a shop. I mean, I'd love space, but I don't want a shop class, and I certainly don't want like a wing of shop classes. If we have 3D printers, I want them in the commons and the public room and the libraries. If we have laser cutters, I want them in a place that lower school art can access them as much as the middle school theater group, as much as upper school CAD classes. And that's the issue, and that's the long and the short of it. Like, I want to see a way that this MakerCulture has a transformative effect on how we structure and organize our schools and what we expect and allow for students. I spend time at Nova Labs, but I have a 5-year-old, and it's really hard to drive 20 minutes to drop in and hang out for 3 hours in the afternoon or the evening. But I'm still an adult, and I'm in enough liberty that I can make the decision of the thing I want to do, how I'm going to work my schedule to give the time I want for the thing I'm interested in. We don't ever give our kids that kind of luxury. There's not an hour in their day from when they arrive to when they leave where they really have that kind of like flexibility. They might have a study hall. Well, our school certainly doesn't have a system where study hall means, you know, find the spot on campus where you feel comfortable and like you want to do something. And I'm hoping the Maker class and the Maker program can be a part of changing that and broadening that the experience for kids.
So,
I don't know how to
Andrew,
speak.
this is Karen. Hey, Andrew, thank you so much. So I will, in the chat, Tim said, and I'm going to follow up just briefly. So, you know, a teacher doesn't have to start where you are, but give us an idea for a first step, either in our classrooms or I'll say this completely personally. So, you know, I teach grown-ups online, but I want to be involved in this kind of thing. Like, what's a first step for a teacher if they don't have access to the whole space, or they have access to a space but they're overwhelmed by what might be in there? Do you have a sense of, you know, what's a baby step?
Well, I would say that the baby step for me is whatever you're interested enough to do. Because if you're not interested enough to really, and not necessarily working out of your base of expertise and your base of comfort, but like that just seems fascinating enough that you're willing to spend the time being confused by it. The fundamental classroom step to take, as far as I can see, working with our 5th grade teachers who really kind of embraced the 20% time concept, even if they never mathematically got anywhere close to 20%, was that they needed to set aside time that wasn't going to get trimmed down just because people were bored. To give middle school kids in particular, or whatever grade you happen to be teaching, time to be fascinated, be frustrated, be bored, and be reinvigorated. I think there's a loop. There's the kind of like the iterative design loop that Tim talked about with 3D printing, but I also think that there's an iterative loop of how you learn to pay attention to things that are hard. How do you learn to take something that is legitimately hard and have it build into something that you feel like you can tackle? So in a classroom with computers, start with Scratch and start with Logo. Like, draw a house from one command, draw a baseball field or a soccer pitch from one command. To do from a kinesthetic maker thing, I really like balloon cars. Like, you can get them at a Rite Aid or whatever, where there's just the little punch balloons in the plastic car with the bad axles. Like, the process of getting those little balloon cars to not swerve into the wall is a huge design challenge. Rube Goldberg is a great place to start, or the kind of like Make an Arcade redemption style game, Keen's Arcade, Cardboard Bit. Cardboard Automata are fantastic. I think I have some links of those up on Tie and Jeans, but there's way better resources out there. Maybe I should share my Digo bookmark for that. And for saying that, like, you don't have to start at the same level of me, I had 0 electronics experience and half a semester of programming experience like 2 years ago at Christmas. My wife bought me the Make Electronics book, and I did the projects in that because it was something that I was too interested to not do. And that, by doing them in public at school, I found the kids who were ready to deep dive. I was able to find some broad steps for the ways people are interested in it, and then work from there. Karen, does that answer that question? Are you looking for some more specifics?
No, I think that's great. Then I like the idea that you start with Scratch too, because that's a software that's often available. It's free. It is get your foot in the door without having to worry about blood on the screwdrivers kind of thing. But I think too, just I like the other point that you made for the grown-ups in the room, the idea of working through a project book or something like that. Like I mean, I'm speaking completely personally now, but like I'd love to buy a Raspberry Pi, but I'm honestly not sure at this point what I'd even do with it. But I think there are things out there that, oh, look at this tutorial, or somebody did this, or somebody did that. One of my favorite projects is the riding vest. It's a vest for bikers, and it's got one of those Arduino boards in it, and it shows how fast you're going, because drivers always think you're going really slow when you're a bike rider. So it's like it helps, I think, for the kids to have ideas of things they might do too.
Absolutely, and certainly I'll give a shout out to the DTLT team at Mary Washington. If I was teaching adults online, I would start with DS-106 materials, whether from the Daily Create or from the Assignment Bank. Like that framework for how do you take something that's a new skill, like start GIFing, start with the animated GIF tools. Everybody watches some video culture that's worth turning into GIFs. In the corner of my eye, I keep seeing my video thing, and I think my eye rolls would probably turn into reasonable GIFs when I'm done with all this. Run through a couple of those things. Not that everyone has to do it at the same time, but you encourage people to do it, and you give the time to share and celebrate it. That's the signage component. DS-106 is nothing but a giant, like, weird Escher painting of broad, shallow steps.